Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Bart Ehrman, as some of you well known, is the atheist. And in this interview with Alex O'Connor, he gave the most ridiculous response why he thinks the resurrection of Christ did not happen. Here's my problem with atheists. Atheists have a presupposition bias that the supernatural is not real. Everything in the universe is comprised of matter and energy. And that, in my opinion, put a wall in front of you and that blind you from seeing the real truth about the resurrection. But let's hear Bart Ehrman respond about the resurrection of Christ. Stay tuned.
I had an episode with William Graig, and he put forward a historical case for the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. And I remember in that podcast, I sort of listening back had wished that I pushed back a little more. And a lot of people actually noticed, and they said, I'm surprised that you didn't really give him a bit more grief for it.
Yeah.
But I figured that perhaps rather than making a botched attempt at doing it myself, it would be better to ask you. I mean, his view on the matter, along with many others, is that we have a few facts about Jesus that we can pretty confidently say are true. Firstly, that, a man called Jesus existed and was sort of going around teaching an ethical code of sorts and gaining followers, got into disrepute with the Roman authorities, was killed by crucifixion, and that afterwards groups of people claimed to have seen him.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that all of these facts are sort of well established?
Yes.
So given that, how to explain the fact that all of these are true at the same time?
Oh, well, I don't see any trouble at all. We have other figures in history for whom we have things like that, with those four facts. I mean, Romulus, the founder of Rome, I don't know if he was a historical figure or not, but people thought he was, and he certainly ended up somehow leaving the earth, and people, there were eyewitnesses saying that they saw him alive afterwards.
I mean, do we have sort of, firstly, are the sources as reliable? Are they as well attested? Do we have multiple?
Now that's another question. See, that's not one of your four.
I like Alex O'Connor because he pushed back. He's not, even though he's a atheist, he's agnostic. He's not just sitting there and just listen to his response, but he's actually pushing back in this interview, and I like that very much. Let's continue with the video.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm asking about is when we say that these facts are well established.
Well, Livy, the historian Livy, so he's a Roman historian, and he reports that. Or Apollonius of Tyana. We have eyewitness testimony to his being raised from the dead.
What eyewitness testimony are we talking about? Like who is it that claims
followers of his?
Like groups at the same time, they sort of all see him sort of all in the same room, or?
Oh no, but see, now you're getting into other facts. See.
Yes.
So the question is, what are facts? So if you're just talking about those four elements, then we certainly have those four elements. So they're not difficult to explain. What William Lane Craig wants to do, though, is to take those four facts and start adding others to them as if they're the same value.
What other facts are we talking about here?
Well, he says that we know that there was an empty tomb.
And you don't think that that's the case?
I don't know.
And one of the things that I think Dr. Craig might say on that point is that if people were claiming to have seen him, if people were claiming that this man had risen from the dead, the tomb was there. It was something people could have gone to check. And it would have probably been one of the first things that they did upon hearing that this Jesus figure had risen from the dead. If there were no empty tomb, surely someone would have discovered this. This is not good evidence confirming the idea that there was, in fact, an empty tomb.
Well, it presupposes that he was buried in a tomb.
This is one of the facts that William Lane Craig thinks we can say is well established, that he was buried in a tomb. That's important to him. You don't think so?
No, I don't. I mean, that's the thing. He takes these four things that basically everybody would agree on. There's a man, Jesus, who got killed, and later people said they saw him alive. So that's fine. I mean, those four are easily explained. Was there an empty tomb? There are very big problems with thinking there was a tomb at all. He's presupposing that the gospel story is right, that Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus the afternoon he was crucified and put him in a family tomb, and on the third day, women came and found the tomb empty. Okay, so what is our evidence of it? Well, the evidence, of course, is only in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They say that. And it was the tradition of Christian.
Okay, what does that mean? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is from 4 different sources. Just because they were his follower does not mean that, hey, they cannot tell the truth of what will happen. What exactly is he saying? But let's continue with the video.
Had for a very long time. So it's certainly the Christian tradition. But there are lots of reasons for doubting that it's right. That he's never taken very seriously. But I don't know if this was on your thing or not, but somebody last week was interviewing me and replaying some things where he was trashing me for some debate we had 20 years ago, where he said that, the only reason I reject resurrection is because I've got some kind of warmed over Humean understanding of things, and I've never read Hume. It is just so wrong. It's just it's just factually wrong. But apart from that, he says that I'm not a historian. I don't know what he thinks. I do know what he thinks I am. He thinks that I'm a textual critic, whatever he thinks that is. And that's just completely wrong, too. It's just like he knows nothing about me, but he's making stuff up. So historians look at what you know about the situation at the time period. And I'm not sure William Lane Craig has even read much history about the time period. But one thing to look at is, for example, just as an example, what do Romans do with crucified victims? So we have records of, we don't have lots of records. I mean, one of the really interesting things that people don't realize, we have no literary description of a crucifixion from the ancient world. Like, nobody describes how they did it. Were they typically nailed? We know they were nailed sometimes because we have some nails that with DNA on. We've got that organic material on them. Were they tied? Were they cross beams? Were they stakes? There's all sorts of stuff we don't really know. We do have a number of references to what Romans did once the person died on their crosses, and the accounts are consistent that what they did is they left them on their crosses as part of the humiliation.
Yes.
That they would decompose on the cross and be attacked by scavengers. And so we have off-the-cuff remarks in a number of sources that that's just what they did. And so there are debates about that. We can have debates about whether that happened within Judaism or not. People say, yeah, Jews didn't allow that. It's absolutely right. Jews didn't allow it. But the Jews weren't killing him. The Romans were killing him.
Yeah.
and so forth and so on. So I don't know of any instance where we have a verified account of anybody being buried on the afternoon of their crucifixion in a known tomb. So how likely is it that they made an exception in the case of Jesus? I mean, we think they would because, he's the Son of God, and so he's exceptional. But Pilate didn't know that Jesus was the Son of God. He was just one of the guys he was crucifying that morning.
It's still quite an exceptional case. I mean, Pilate seems quite distressed at the fact that Jesus ends up going to...
According to whom?
To crucifixion. Well, according to the gospel narrative.
The Christian narrative.
But this is a possibility.
He crucified... It's possible. It's possible he's more upset about one of the other two guys.
If it is true that you have an instance of...
Yeah, it's like he said it again, according to whom? The Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are historical documents. That's how history works. Somebody saw it and they wrote it down. That's how history works. Let's continue with the video.
Of Pilate really not thinking that this man ought to be crucified and asking the crowds.
No, but I don't think that's historical. Why would we think that's historical?
What do you mean you don't think that's historical? You have 4 different accounts, 4 historical different accounts. Just listen to his response. This guy claimed to be a historian, and he's looking at 4 different writing from historical people, and he said he doesn't think that's historical. How does history work? Somebody saw it, and I'm gonna say it again. Somebody saw it and they wrote it down. That's how it works. It's not complicated. Let's continue with the video.
I guess I'm not trying to make the case that it's that we can know that this is the case. But this might be an explanation as to why we do have an instance of the Romans making an exception when it comes to sort of leaving someone on the cross. Because Jesus was exceptional, not just because he was the Son of God, because, of course, I don't believe that, and the Romans wouldn't have believed that. But that it was still an exceptional case.
Why?
I guess in the case of Pilate, this might have been someone who he really didn't think deserved to be crucified.
Why?
Because this would be the case if the gospel narratives are correct. If what's written there is correct.
That's right.
Again, I'm not claiming to be able to say that we know that they are, but if they were, this would offer an explanation of
That's
how
right.
we have an exception.
But the argument then is, if the gospel narratives are correct, then the gospel narratives are correct. And so that's not an argument.
But it seems to me that might be the case if the narratives were written so as to obviously give an explanation as to why Jesus was taken down from the cross. If it was clear that...
Yes, the gospel writers are explaining why he would be allowed off. That's right.
It doesn't seem particularly plausible to me, though, that the idea of presenting Pilate as slightly disturbed by the idea of Jesus being crucified was a device that was used to explain why Jesus would have been taken down from the cross when Romans didn't usually do that.
No, the reason for
That
showing
seems a little
Pilate's
far-fetched.
the reason for showing Pilate's disturbance is something else. The reason that when you look how Pilate's portrayed in the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then you even add on later Gospels, like the Gospel of Peter and later Gospels, when you do that and you line them up chronologically, Pilate gets more and more disturbed. And he starts, in Mark, he and kind of the Jewish council, they agree, okay, he needs to be crucified. In Matthew's gospel, he washes his hands and says, I'm innocent of this man's blood. And the crowd cries out, his blood be upon us and our children. When you get to Luke, a little bit later, Pilate declares Jesus innocent 3 times. And he sends him off to Herod, who declares him innocent. When you get to the Gospel of John, he declares him innocent 3 times, and it says in John, the chief priests and scribes insisted he be crucified. And when you read it in the Greek, it says, Pilate then handed him over to them to be crucified, to the chief priests and scribes. When you get to the Gospel of Peter, it's even more. Pilate gets increasingly innocent, proclaiming Jesus' innocence. Why is that? Well, scholars have long known the answer to this one. If Pilate's not at fault, then who is? It's those damn Jews. They did it to him. So the reason for Pilate's exoneration is in order to heighten Jewish culpability. I don't think that's a historical motif. If you actually know anything about Pilate, if you read the descriptions in Philo or Josephus, this is not somebody who sat around agonizing about crucifying the wrong guy. And to think that Jesus is the exception just means that we're so used to thinking of Jesus as the exception. But for Pilate, he's just one of these troublemakers. He's calling himself the king of the Jews. Crucify him.
But now, a moment ago, you said that, William Lane Craig is wrong because he says that we can know there was an empty tomb, and we can't. Seems to me a relatively minor detail in that you said, we have these 4 facts, including that Jesus was crucified, including that groups of people claim to have seen him after he died. You say, and these are
I'm not sure groups of people claim.
Okay, because this is what I wanted to pick up on when you said that this can be easily explained. What is it that you think can be explained? The fact that we have records of groups claiming to see Jesus, the fact that groups did actually claim to see Jesus, the fact that individuals claim to see Jesus. What are the things that you think, this isn't troubling for us to explain without having to invoke a resurrection?
I don't think it's troubling to invoke the idea that there were individuals who claimed they saw Jesus alive afterwards. I don't think we have good attestation for it. I think the Apostle Paul claims he saw Jesus alive a few years afterwards. And so I think, I don't think he's lying about it. I think he probably thought he saw Jesus.
Paul, also being our earliest source of the New Testament, claims at one point that Jesus appeared to 500 people.
That's right.
This seems to be some good evidence that we do have.
No, I don't think so. Paul knows there's a story that 500 people saw him. But I don't think that's evidence that 500 people saw him. That's a claim, and so a claim isn't evidence. Evidence is when you try to substantiate the claim.
Actually, this is evidence. Paul was writing to the Corinthian brothers and sisters. He's telling them, hey, 500 people saw Jesus. In other words, Paul is saying, hey, if you want to know the real truth about the resurrection of Christ, go ask these people. Don't take it from me. Take it from these people. Do your investigation. That is powerful evidence. But let's continue with the video.
And so how do you go about establishing whether 500 people actually saw Jesus? Well, you look at what Paul says, and then you see, are there other sources to corroborate it? Paul's writing before the Gospels. None of the Gospels mentions anything about this, or the Gospel sources. So Paul's our only source. And so is he right or not? Well, it seems like if 500 people saw him, that this would be something that other people would mention. So I don't think we know. The thing about seeing things is that we have all the time, we have people who see things that aren't there. And a lot of evangelical Christians say, look, if you've got group visions, you can't have group hallucinations.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you explain Mother Mary showing up to hundreds of people at one time?
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, that we have examples of groups of people claiming that they've seen something that we don't actually believe they did.
Yes.
However, it seems in the case of the group sightings of Jesus, of the gospel narratives, we're talking about a man like physically walking into a room, interacting, talking with these people.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not like sort of seeing a vision of
But
Mary.
we
It's like,
have modern accounts of Jesus showing up today in all sorts of circles.
but
physically showing up.
I don't suppose that we have accounts of a man who dies being seen by groups of people physically in the flesh, talking to them, interacting with them, allowing them to sort of touch his hand, and appearing to people who spent significant...
appearing to a senator and explaining what's happened to him. And so I think that, and my view of this is that the kinds of evidence we look for Jesus needs to be the kind of evidence we allow for anyone else. And so it's striking to me that evangelical Christians focus on the Jesus materials, but they don't look at traditions that are comparable from the same period or since. And so they say, well, you can't have group hallucinations, but they think that's exactly what you have when the Blessed Virgin Mary shows up. Or they say it's different because Jesus' disciples saw him. Well, okay, but that's true of Apollonius of Tyana. Or that they'll say, well, but so many people have come to believe this, that it's implausible that would happen if so many people believe. Well, there are about 2 billion people in the world who think that Muhammad was physically taken up into heaven. So do you use the same criteria, or do you make exceptions in your case?
But to have all of these things together in one example, I mean, you're quite right that you have a sort of an ancient account of an individual claiming to see somebody, and then you have a modern account of groups claiming to see a vision of something.
But here's the problem. So many people claim they have seen Jesus in modern time, but in historical time, the time of Jesus in the first century, they claim to have saw this. They claim to saw Jesus, and they were willing to die for that fact. That brings great, credibility to their claim. These are first century Jews, and these people were Jews. They are very religious people, and they saw Christ, and they changed their life drastically. And they are preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ without fear. Some of them die for that. That is powerful evidence. But let's continue with the video.
Have all of these things together in one example. I mean, you're quite right that you have a sort of an ancient account of an individual claiming to see somebody, and then you have a modern account of groups claiming to see a vision of something, and then you have lots of people coming to believe something that they didn't see themselves. But put them together, groups of people seeing a sort of physical, physical sighting of a man who they used to know and followed around, and lots of them coming to believe that's the case all together seems to be a higher standard of evidence.
None of those people in any of those groups attests to it. You see what I'm saying? We don't have groups of people saying they saw Jesus.
We have individual writers.
We have writers saying that groups of people saw him. And that isn't the same thing. You actually do have groups of people saying they saw Mary. And so that's stronger evidence.
Bart Ehrman, in my opinion, is a false prophet. Even though he's not a Christian, but he's a false prophet to the atheist community. As you can clearly see, if anybody read the gospel, Christian, if you know anything, if you know just a little bit about history, we know what the Roman used to do to Christian. You know, Christians, they were persecuted and they were dying for their faith. And it's the same thing in the gospel. Yes, it was reported by 4 people, by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But they were telling the truth because they were willing to die for what they claim to have seen. They claim to have seen the resurrected Christ. And to me, that is powerful evidence. If you like this video, press the like button and share it with somebody. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.